What's up guys, I'm Dave Klein, aka DaveControl, and I am super stoked that we have more Elden Ring to go over and talk about. And with this latest update, we got a whole lot of new information. In fact, so much so, I almost felt like it spoiled a little bit, but that's okay. Before I get into this, around 4 months ago, I made a video about everything we know so far about Elden Ring, including information from interviews with game director Hidetaka Miyazaki. So there are many details I discussed in that video I won't be reiterating. On top of that, I'm sure we'll have a whole lot more to discuss in a week after the network test rolls out. But all of that said, let's turn on some Kingsfield music and discuss open world Dark Souls. Elden Ring's recent gameplay preview essentially takes us on a long journey from the open world of the Lands Between into and partially through a legacy dungeon. We saw a lot more about the open world aspects of Elden Ring as part of this. To make a comparison, the open world itself seems to act very similar to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. While traversing the open world, you can call your steed at any point or dismount at any point. Meanwhile, you gather map fragments as you travel to fill out the overworld map. It's unclear how to find these map fragments, but it could be related to the various Erd trees of the game, similar to how Ashika Tower in Breath of the Wild filled out that game's map. However, unlike Breath of the Wild, there is no map at all within the game's dungeons, with those being far more traditionally Souls in style. Elden Ring's map is filled with craftable materials you can collect. At different points in the gameplay preview, you can spot various glowing collectibles that will definitely be items your character can pick up for crafting. There are also some wild animals roaming about, and I'd imagine that by killing these, you'll also gain some precious crafting materials. Later in the gameplay preview, we actually see the player crafting together some sleep bone arrows. The items required are thin animal bones, flight pinion, and Trina's lily. The thin animal bones are acquired specifically by hunting beasts, and the flight pinion by hunting birds. So I think this all but confirms the idea that hunting animals will contribute meaningfully to crafting. Finally, there's also Trina's lily, which is exceedingly rare to find, so it seems like we might be told if certain crafting materials are on the more rare side. The Lands Between are filled with multiple sites of grace, which would seem to act as Elden Ring's version of a bonfire. Within the Lands Between, these can manifest rays of guiding light, although to what, I'm not sure. It's also unclear if these are in the Legacy dungeons, and if so, if they'll have rays of guiding light within those dungeons. As we saw in the first trailer, you can summon your steed anywhere within the open world portion of the Lands Between. However, you won't be able to ride horseback within Legacy dungeons. We see more of how a horseback dragon battle would work. It's definitely conducive for ranged attacks, like using a catalyst in magic. However, while you can strike at enemies with your sword, your horse will still keep moving, so it seems like defeating an enemy in this way would take far longer, as you won't be able to combo attacks. It's also unclear how powerful these attacks would be compared to attacks on the ground. On top of that, further in the trailer, we see a plethora of new critical attacks, and it doesn't seem like these are possible via horseback. So while the bonus of using your steeds means you have plenty of added speed, can avoid enemies, and can even double jump via horseback, your offense might severely suffer as a trade-off. We once again see the launch pads that your horse can take to launch in the air and conveniently travel great heights, and now know they're called Spirit Springs. That said, I think they're in specific places and probably not something you can just place at will. Something I noticed when the dragon flew in and killed some NPC enemies was a golden aura glow around the character. It seems you still absorb experience in a similar visual fashion as the previous FromSoft games. Similar to how Dark Souls 3's combat was Dark Souls influenced by Bloodborne, Elden Ring looks to be Dark Souls 3's combat heavily influenced by Sekiro. What I mean by this is that in several portions we see the importance of stealth a la Sekiro, as sneaking around was introduced in that game. We're shown a scene where the character sneaks past enemies to avoid detection, as well as a scene where the player sneaks behind an enemy so they can stealthily shoot them down with an arrow. After, the player essentially performs a death blow on the enemy, once again similar to Sekiro. While there were critical strikes in previous Souls games, these were strictly performed by either parrying and riposting or maneuvering for backstabs. Now you can perform these critical takedowns on downed enemies. Next, we see the player jump down and attack an enemy from above. Jumping was introduced in Sekiro. On top of that, in previous Soulsborne titles, you would perform a plunging attack when dropping down on an enemy. Now it seems to be a more standard jumping attack, perhaps with more weight to it if the game takes into account your height. As noted in the trailer, this breaks the enemy's stance, allowing you to perform a critical attack without needing to parry first. I also want to mention death blows as they relate to the dragon we saw earlier in the trailer. Once the dragon is hurt enough, we see the character perform what appears to be a death blow, and the trailer cuts before we can see if this actually kills the dragon or not. If it doesn't, that could mean that some bosses have multiple health bars similar to in Sekiro. However, we really don't know at all yet, and I'm sure we'll have far more mechanical answers in a week after the network test. There are several new weapons, catalyst attacks, and special weapon attacks on display in this trailer, and it's exciting to see the level of customization you'll have and how you'd like to approach combat. We also see more examples of spirits who the player can summon into battle in order to aid them. While we already knew this was possible, the main takeaway I saw was that you can also use this for bosses, as we later see this used on Godrick the Golden. As I mentioned earlier, you'll have a map this time around in the open world segment of the game. So let's talk about that map for a bit. While we see a good portion of the map, as well as large chunks which are missing map fragments, we also see where the player is standing and the direct correlation to what the map looks like compared to the world view. One extremely notable thing both on the map and in the world are the Erd trees. These trees are the giant golden trees we see in several shots of both the gameplay trailer and gameplay preview. On the map, these are represented by large glowing trees. These Erd trees are a major feature of the map and game, so they must be important. But how so, and what exactly do they do from a gameplay perspective? The lore states that in the lands between, ruled by Queen Marika the Eternal, the Elden Ring, the source of the Erd tree, has been shattered. Supposedly there's a hub in the game, so I have two guesses. Either these trees take you back to the game's hub, or it's also possible that each tree corresponds to a section of the map, and reaching those highly visible markers is what will then add that section to your map, similar to Breath of the Wild's Sheikah Tower. However, that's just speculation. It's also possible there's some sort of ability or treasure beneath or at the base of the trees. There are a couple markers on the map that weren't specifically mentioned. One is something that looks like it indicates a rune. This one up here looks like a village destroyed and underwater, leading to the idea that this area might be a marsh. There's a large cave entrance marker, likely indicating a mini dungeon within a cave, and there's a wooden hut. My guess is that these are all mini dungeons, but I'm not sure why there are so few. It could be that the player has gone within a certain range, activating the marker. It could be these are ones that are unexplored, or ones the player has finished exploring. There's also a couple of these telescope markers. Unfortunately, due to the mist and distance, I couldn't tell exactly what this was from the world view. Finally, there's these golden direction markers which, if I'm being honest, I'm really not sure what they represent. I'd suggest they're sites of grace, with the direction being what the guiding light points out. However, considering only 4 are on this map, that seems pretty unlikely. On the other hand, by pressing Y, you open the sites of grace list, probably for a form of fast travel, and I'd have to imagine that these sites of grace will also appear on the map. On the bottom right, below the compass, the map says early day, so there's a quick and easy way to check what time it is. As the trailer itself blatantly states, you can place markers that help you out, as well as beacons for places you want to travel that clearly show up in the world, so you won't need to keep returning to your map to find your destination. From the world view outside of the map, the focal point is the castle straight ahead. It's honestly unclear to me if this is Stormveil Castle, as the architecture looks different on a side-by-side. At first glance, I thought it was, but then I realized the architecture of this castle is too clean and not nearly as harsh or falling apart like Stormveil. To the left is a dilapidated cathedral or villa, and to the right are ominous mountains that could also hold something interesting. It looks like 37 seconds in from the first gameplay trailer. Far right is a long bridge that looks like something too distinct, and you'll probably travel across. On the map view, we can see that there's an island underneath it on the other side. To the bottom left is some sort of camp. Outside of being a super pretty shot, this also shows the game has a good draw distance. Much of the trailer seems to be heading to the right side of this area, and I have a feeling this is the section of the game we'll be seeing in the network test. I thought it would be a good idea to check what stats the character is given as shown in the menu. This will mostly look familiar to Soul's Vet, with your general stats being Vigor, likely your HP, Mind for your FP, Endurance, your Stamina, Strength and Dexterity for different types of physical attacks and builds, Intelligence and Faith for different magic builds, and Arcane. Arcane is the interesting one here, as it's a stat that only existed in Bloodborne. In Bloodborne, this stat increased your ability to use most hunter tools, boosted item discovery, and gave a boost to various elemental attacks. So in Elden Ring, where you can equip different types of weapon attacks, Arcane may affect that and how effective these attacks are. But again, that's just speculation. Another notable change is that your equip load isn't only shown in terms of a fraction, but you're given the information of how heavy the load is for your character, so you won't need to roll around to find out. Underneath the character's level is runes held. This could be similar to Souls and Dark Souls, where it's the basic number of experience points / currency you're carrying, with the runes being the way you level up and or purchase items and equipment. Finally, we see 2 memory slots at the bottom, and this one I'm not totally clear on. We see the character immediately perform special weapon attacks after leaving the menu, so I believe you equip those onto the weapons themselves. My best guess is that memory slots could be where you hold your equipped spells, similar to the Souls series, and we just didn't see anything here as this was a non-magic or faith-wielding build. At another site of grace, multiplayer is finally shown. In this gameplay preview, co-op is specifically shown, however, PvP and invasions were reconfirmed in the trailer. While Miyazaki stated these elements would exist in an interview, it's nice to see them in action. On top of that, some players' online emotes now have audio to them. We're shown a co-op boss battle in this area that's notably by a golden tree, or what I believe are the Erd trees. I've been wondering if it could be this spot we saw earlier when the character was looking into the distance, and this spot on the map. What do you think? Outside of the cool abilities shown in the boss battle, one interesting element I wanted to point out was that we see the player both attacking the horse and jumping up to attack the rider on top. It brings up the question of whether jumping and attacking the rider specifically actually hurts the boss more. Something really interesting to me, after dealing with the OP gravity of previous Souls games, is how the player here nonchalantly jumps down from a great height. Of course, it is possible they lose some health from this fall, as the HUD is turned off for this video, but it is still quite the fall. This seems to be another element taken directly from Sekiro, especially with the ability to jump. We do, however, see a drop that is too high, and the player character clearly needs to use certain horizontal gravestones to drop down further without taking too much fall damage or dying. Below these graves is a catacomb along the wall, or, excuse me, catacombs. Perhaps this is the one that we saw on the map.
Catacombs.
Excitingly, these catacombs look to be filled with traps a la Sen's Funhouse or King's Field. Also, illusory walls are back, confirmed. Time to swing your weapon at every single wall in existence. Wall Checkers Anonymous, unite! Before I get to the various NPCs introduced in this gameplay preview, I want to talk about Stormveil Castle, which, as we learn, is within the Limgrave Region. If you look back at the first gameplay trailer, there's a boss who appears on a bridge in front of a castle to attack the approaching Tarnished. This castle is, in fact, Stormveil Castle, so while we didn't see this particular boss in the gameplay preview, you can expect them to show up guarding the way to the exterior of the castle. From the interior, Stormveil Castle actually reminds me a lot of the Boletarian Palace in 1-1 of Demon's Souls. I think this is supposed to be the first area you tackle, or at least meant to be, even if the game is completely non-linear, and that would make sense for it to be a training ground of sorts like the Boletarian Palace. Within Stormveil Castle's dungeon design, it's notable that you actually have to jump on this terrain, and needing to jump will be an additional obstacle within Legacy dungeons. I'm not sure if this specific spot with what looks like an NPC sulking in the corner is supposed to be Godrick the Golden walking away on the bottom floor, but I absolutely love the detail here with all of the disembodied arms. Similar to Souls, before fighting Godrick the Golden, there's a golden fog gate, so fog gates are back. However, I wonder if there are multiple in Legacy dungeons or only before major boss fight. Also, if there will be any fog gates outside of Legacy dungeons. We see 2 phases to the Godrick boss battle. The first phase shows fighting against him with all of his arms relatively normal, however, the second shows one of his arms, which was already slightly malformed, having transformed into a dragon head. Godrick asks the dragon for strength, so we see why and how it pays off. Something I find interesting about all of this is that when we saw the co-op bro helping our main Tarnished man fighting off a boss earlier, the co-op bro actually used a similar technique while helping battle against this boss earlier in the trailer. So that means one of 3 things. Either A, this technique of using a dragon's power is somewhat common and an ability you can gain somewhere else in the game. B, an ability you gain for defeating Godrick or around where Godrick is. Or C, related to the Erd tree that can be seen near or within Stormveil. This is what led me to think perhaps these Erd trees could grant the player abilities, such as utilizing the same dragon arm technique that Godrick uses. Okay, so gameplay out of the way, let's talk about some NPCs. NPC number 1 is Alexander the Iron Fist. He completely gives off Siegmeyer vibes, or Siegward if you prefer Dark Souls 3. This friendly NPC seems to be one of the inhuman enemies you come across, and if that definitely is the case, and it's not just some super elaborate outfit, it means you might have to be a little more careful when attacking enemies as to not accidentally attack a friendly NPC. Another major one is Melina, who could be our new Emerald Herald / Maiden in Black / etc, etc. She has an interesting tattoo or scar along her left eye, but it's hard to say what this means just yet. She tells the player,
I offer you an accord.
So it could be we need her to level up, and you offer her runes in order to do so. Within Stormveil, there are 2 NPCs we encounter, one who offers friendly advice you can either take or ignore, and Rogier, who states,
"This place is bristling with tarnished hunters, you know. They sacrifice our kind for grafting."
There are a couple other NPCs that Tarnish seems to run past but doesn't speak within this trailer, so I just wanted to point these instances out. We also get to see the full cutscene shown briefly in the gameplay trailer of Godrick the Golden, ruler of Stormveil. Godrick refers to a dragon as the true-born heir, perhaps of the Elden Ring, as well as someone kindred. So it'll be interesting to see what this actually means and how it plays out when we can truly dive into the lore. So there you have a breakdown of the Elden Ring gameplay preview. I hope I was able to point out some things you missed, and if there were any cool details I missed, please do share. As I mentioned, I previously did a video on everything we know so far 4 months ago, so there may have been some details I didn't discuss here that I did in that video. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys soon for more Elden Ring.